and then quadruple clicked my mic button, and it took
Oh,
it forever to respond. Sorry, this is Aaron Zeckoski. I'm moderately um, active developer in the Sakai community, and mostly I'm around because I'm a member of the currently now the PMC, or previously the TCC, but basically just the technical leadership for the project. And I've been involved since, I guess, around 2004. So that's my quick history. And I know a decent amount about Jira and Confluence. I probably spend, close to an hour a day on average in Sakai's Jira. So um, and hopefully I can shed some light on practical use.
thanks, Aaron. Um, this is Neal Caidan. I'm the Sakai CLE Community Coordinator. I've been part of this community for, um, I guess, a little over a year now. I joined as the Community Coordinator in August of last year. I'm in Jira quite a lot, and I've been learning a lot from folks like Aaron and others in the community who've helped me out, and also by trial and error, and also through some really good documentation that's available on Jira. So I'll point that out as well. And as Aaron said, we're going to try and focus more on the practical aspects of using Jira, um, and and feel free to ask questions as we go along. Um, the way we thought we would organize this is to talk about how you um, search Jira, how you track issues, and how you would open issues. To give you a little context of what Jira is a main communications tool within the Sakai community, in addition to our wiki, Confluence, and of course the email lists. And Jira specifically, its role is in tracking features and bugs and tasks. So the actual work of the community goes through Jira, and Jira also is hooked up to our code repository system so that when changes are made to actual Sakai code to make improvements or bug fixes, that's reflected in Jira as well. It's also how we keep track of the workflow, meaning as a ticket gets reviewed, as it gets opened, worked on, tested, we keep track of all that information through Jira. Um, I'm going to show you quickly just something that may be helpful. So I guess I will start with sharing my screen. And I didn't mean to share Skype. Let's go over to here. So in Confluence, there is a Sakai Jira guidelines page. And, and, and this is a good reference page, because what it does is it tells you how we specifically in the Sakai community are using Jira's fields. Jira has a lot of built-in fields and a lot of built-in capability, and it also has a lot of ability to customize it to your particular needs and your particular workflow. So this is a great reference if you want to get deeper into Jira or have questions about specific fields and how the community is using them. This is a great resource. The way I thought might be really useful to get started would be to think of a use case being, what if you find a bug in Sakai? What if I know, that's probably one of the most common things, is somebody is doing something in Sakai, and they find a problem, or they think it's a problem, and so then what do you do with it next? So I thought I'd sort of give you an
What Neal
overview of
meant
that
to
and use
say
that as a
was
model.
that finding bugs is extremely uncommon, but go ahead.
Yeah, of course, very rare. So, so the first thing that the community recommends when you think you found a bug is to, reproduce it, see if you can actually create it another time. Because sometimes, it might be something you did that you weren't thinking about, you weren't paying close attention to, and if you try it again, and you might find that there was something that you did about in the operation that caused an unexpected result. But if you can verify it, if you can reproduce it, you might want to see if somebody else has already reported it, if there's already a fix. available. So the first step would be to search Jira and see if there's already a Jira available. So that's what we would recommend. All right, and then we'll get into searching in just a second. And then if you do find something that's in Jira, then you might want to keep track of it, or you might want to notice that the status and maybe it's been fixed, and you might be able to ask your local support folks who manage the system, or if you're using a hosting provider, you might be able to ask them to actually implement the fix. So that might be one possibility as you find an existing ticket. And then you might want to do something with it. You might want to see and track the status. You might want to comment it on yourself and your experience that might contribute to helping the community fix the bug. Or you might want to, if there's a solution, you might want to take that solution and implement it and fix your problem. So there's a couple of options. Let's see. That might be one option, see and track the status. Solution, then go ahead and use it. So those are some possibilities if you do find something. And if you don't find the issue that you were hoping to find, then we recommend that you contact the lists. Probably the dev list is one of the best places. You might also try Sakai user. Because when you post a list, even if you haven't found it, other people on the list may already have be familiar with the issue. Even though you didn't find it through your efforts in making it and doing a search, somebody else might find it, or be aware of a simple way to find it. So that's a really good checkpoint. And also, you might be able to find if other people can reproduce and have that issue. So that's a really valuable thing to do after you do some searching for your Jira, is to contact the list and see what they advise you to do. So that's why I kind of want to put this little flow up here. And after that, typically, very, very common thing at that point would be, at this point, to open a Jira ticket. And we'll cover how to do that. So Aaron, does that seem pretty much like a good overview of what would happen in the rare case when somebody might find a bug?
Super rare case, I would say, but yes.
Okay. So we're going to start from the beginning part of it, where you're doing a search. So we'll go back to screen sharing if I can figure out how to do that. Let's see, stop sharing that and start sharing my screen. So one of the easiest ways to search in Jira is actually to use Google.
Quick question.
Okay.
So let me toss in, or let me. So he asked what other lists should be copied. In general, if you're not really sure, the dev list is probably your best list to start with, right? Just to toss a couple sort of stats out there, the dev list is generally speaking larger than every other list put together. So there's a good chance if you're trying to reach people, you're gonna sort of hit the largest set on the dev list. That said, because there's a lot of traffic on the dev list sometimes, if you have something that's very production oriented, you may want to try the production list, just because the people who tend to be on the production list and pay attention to it that's not the right way to say it. The better way to say it is that the people who are on the production list are more likely to pay attention to that list than they are to some of the stuff on the dev list, just because the dev list is so high traffic sometimes. So if you have a very production oriented issue, and I don't just mean any random bug you find in production, I mean performance issues or something like a deployment problem or something to that effect, right? An issue which is very production centric and not really code centric necessarily, I would say that's appropriate to copy over onto the production list. We have actually just very recently, in the last 2 weeks maybe, gone in and actually gotten rid of a bunch of the other lists. So we've trimmed the lists down substantially, and that's still a work in progress. So eventually the idea is that we'll trim them down even more than they are. But as far as bugs and trying to figure out, is this an issue that someone else is having? I'd say there's really only 3 lists that are generally appropriate, and that's essentially the dev list first, because it's the highest traffic and best way to reach the most possible people. Doesn't mean that you should flood that list, because if you flood it, people will probably not pay a huge amount of attention. The second best one is production, which is going to sort of let you focus a little bit to say this is a production issue, and people are fairly likely to look at it. And then the last one that I would hit is probably the release team list, and that's only because the people on the release team are very oriented on towards fixing issues related to releases, right? So if we have an upcoming release and you are essentially running pre-release code, say that you're very adventurous and you're running some pre-release code, or you think you found an issue which exists in the code that is about to be released and you want to see it fixed. And like, for example, let's say 294 or 295 or something is coming out. I should have said 295. And you're running 293 and you found an issue and you're pretty sure it exists in 295 and you want to make sure that someone pays attention and addresses it, or perhaps lets you know if it has been addressed, then the release team list might be the appropriate venue for that kind of a question. But all that said, you should probably start with the dev list. And Jan's pointing out that OSP bugs work. It works to report those on the portfolio list. And there are a couple specialty lists as well, not just the OSP list. There are a few other specialty lists, like there was a message forums list. I think that one's been rolled up. There's a Samago list. I think we're planning to maybe roll that one up. I'm not going to swear to that, though. So some of the other lists are kind of going away. I think the idea eventually is that rather than making people seek out some of the other lists, that they would go to sort of the more centralized lists and not have to try to figure out which of 20 or so lists do I actually join. But anyway, somewhat long-winded answer, but I feel like that's an important thing to mention. So to rehash, dev list first, fall back to the production list if it's production oriented, fall back to the release list if it's release oriented, and that should cover you in 99% of your cases.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, I agree. That's an important one, knowing where to go. And I posted in the chat box a link to where the collab server lists are in case you weren't aware of that or had forgotten where that existed. And the dev list is actually Sakai-dev at collab.sakaiproject.org, and the production list is production at collab.sakaiproject.org. And the other one was the CLE release team, which is CLE-release-team, and they're all here. So that'll probably tickle your memory if you come back to this this page and see which one you want to sign up for. And of course, you can look at the archives to see the kinds of questions that are being asked if you're not totally sure. But yeah, that sounded good to me as well. So getting back to searching, I thought I'd start by maybe the simplest search, which is just to use Google, since so many, since all of us, I think, are pretty comfortable using Google and understand what it is. And so this is one kind of shortcut way, and then I'll get into Jira. But I thought this would be worth showing. So if you use the special site : command, and then put in the location where our Jira instance is at jira.sakaiproject.org, you can pretty much search. I don't know if anyone wants to volunteer a keyword, but I'm just going to make something up: sort order, and see what it comes up with. So here's a whole bunch of Jiras, and if you notice, they all point to our Jira instance because we told Google that's the only place we want you to look. We don't want you to look in the whole universe of the internet. And gradebook view, drop down sort order, not sorted, should honor sort order. So you can see it found a whole bunch of tickets that look look pretty reasonable. That doesn't mean that it covers everything. I did a little bit of an experiment and myself just and did find that Google doesn't always get you exactly what you want. Sometimes going into Jira does help, but this is such an easy thing to do that I thought it would be worth showing. So now I'm going to go into Jira. I guess I can click one of these and see. And I'll talk about Jira has an amazingly large number of ways of sorting things, and I'm not going to be able to cover all of them, so we'll try and hit on the top things that you can do, and then point you to places where you can get more information. So the first thing I thought I'd mention, when you log into Jira, which I assume you all have accounts, and that's an important thing. So when you go to jira.sakaiproject.org, it's really clearly labeled. I can show it to you actually. If we log out, if you don't have an account, and you just go to that page like this, there's a login area up here, and if you haven't got an account yet, you can click the sign up button. So I'm assuming most people do have it, but it's probably worth mentioning. Then when you go into Jira, a couple of things that I think are really handy to be aware of as soon as you go in is that you have the issues. You have several tabs up here, and there's an issues tab. And one of the things it does, it keeps track of all your recent issues. So if you've been searching and going into various tickets, Jira actually keeps track of it. And so that's really useful. So you don't have to remember, well, how did I search for it to find it the last time or last 2 times ago? It'll be right here in the recent issues, and you won't need to go through a search. The other thing to be aware of is there's a quick search over here. If you type in some text in the quick search, it'll search all the projects in Jira. And by all the projects, I mean that in addition to Sakai, there are a number of other projects, including, as you see here, there's an infrastructure project where we handle things like people who want to commit to Jira. It'll search that too, probably won't find anything. There's also some other probably old projects that aren't being used so much. And so it will search the whole of Jira. So if I put sort order in here, it'll find everything, 387 issues. Now, this is really good to get into this. A couple things that I'll point out, and I'm going to watch my timing because, like I said, the search by itself is really rich. As I mentioned, there is documentation, which I'll point out as well. Text searches all the text fields, and this little tilde thing means basically Jira is capable of doing like a fuzzy search, where it's not a literal search on the exact word sort order, but can be kind of smarter and make it a broader search than you might have even intended. And over here, you'll see switch to basic. So there's 2 modes in Jira searching, switch to basic and switch to advanced. And that I'll cover in just a second. And the other way to get into search real quickly is just under, again, issues. So you should really be focused on that issues drop down is search for issues. And search for issues, again, shows switch to advanced or switch to basic. So what's really cool about Jira is that you can use its built-in capability for searching, and then it builds a query for you, which then if you're comfortable with things like with its query language, then you can go in and tweak those or modify those queries and customize them to meet your needs. So you can see under projects, we have several projects, and probably the ones you'll be most interested in is SAK. So the SAK is the Sakai project. It contains most of the core functions in Sakai. So in most cases, you'll use that. You'll also notice that there's Samigo. So if you know you're specifically going to be searching on a test and quiz issue with Samigo, then you would probably want to click that instead. And Aaron, remind me, is Samigo getting merged into the Jira? Is it getting scrunched in, or is it being kept separate?
That's something we're still trying to figure out. So this is sort of another FYI, but over the past few weeks, as part of the general code cleanup that we've been doing for the next release of Sakai, whatever that is, maybe 4, who knows. Some of the cleanups are code-based, some of them are Jira-based, and some of them are infrastructure-based, like the mailing list. So I already mentioned the mailing list. We've also rolled up a lot of the projects, right? There used to be a much larger number of projects in sort of the general Sakai Jira. So there used to be a separate one for polls, and there was a separate one for Message Center, and a separate one for all these different tools that are part of Sakai. And rather than making people try to wade their way through all these different projects and figure out which one is appropriate, we've rolled most of them into the SAC project, with the idea that eventually what we're probably going to have is really maybe 3 or 4 projects only. So right now it kind of looks like Samigo will stay separate, so it'll probably be Samigo would be one. Another one would be the kernel project. We do sort of want to keep the kernel a little bit separate from the rest of Sakai because it is kind of different, right? The kernel is, for those who aren't aware, essentially the core code in Sakai. It does most of the work. The tools are really the parts that the user interfaces with, but the kernel sort of manages your users and your courses and your memberships and lots of other functionality which is necessary to build the tools on top of. And then there's just the regular SAC project, which really is the entirety of the tool structure, right? So you've got the tool structure, you've got the kernel structure, or sort of the kernel area, and then a few of the tools which are very highly managed projects would probably stay separate as well, like Samigo.
Thanks. So, and kind of the essence of that, to build on what Aaron's saying, is that in most cases, you'll simply be able to search in the SAK project. And so that would be the recommendation in most cases. But you can check to see which projects are here. And again, if you have questions, you can always ask, like on the Sakai dev list, that type of thing, to get some direction. But this will be primarily what we want to use. And then issue type, we have, bugs, patches, roadmaps. Personally, I wouldn't worry too much about that. I would just leave it as all. Status is something, this is where it helps to know what the workflow is. So I'm not going to get into all the detail of the complete workflow because that would be relatively time consuming, but to point you back also to Jira guidelines that explain what each of those mean in the context of how we use them in Sakai. So it explains the workflow, it explains the difference between those different issue types I just showed you, it explains the status, what those different status options mean. So it's a great reference point there. And it would depend what you're looking for. I think just if you were looking for a bug, well, it's possible that that bug has been fixed. The issue's already been, let's say you're using Sakai 2.8. So the version of Sakai you're using obviously is very important. Let's say you're on Sakai 2.8. It's possible that the issue that you're searching on has already been fixed and closed, but that doesn't mean you don't want to see it. So you might want to start with looking at all the statuses until you get familiar with what they actually mean and how they apply in your situation. And this is a really neat one because you can also search on a particular assignee. So if you know that somebody particular like Aaron is working on the ticket that you're interested in, if you happen to know that somehow, then you could search on Aaron Zeckoski and it could find all the tickets assigned to him. And then you can put in a text box. I don't know if Aaron's working on any related to sort order, but I guess we'll find. So there are 4 tickets that over time Aaron's worked on that have something to do with sort order in the tickets. And I mentioned that there's this advanced mode, and there's also more criteria. So there's other fields, including custom fields. There's a whole ton of fields, and you have access to them through this. I'm trying to think that probably the most common ones you might want to look at are affected version. And Aaron, jump in here if you think I'm going off stray, because I haven't thought through this completely. But affected version I know is one that I look at a lot, and a fixed version. So affected version is basically when it's been reported. Oh, this is something we think affects version 2.8, something in version 2.8.
Neal?
Well, you can see, yeah, go ahead.
This is Lynn. To me, the most important field is component. I mean, often when I'm searching for a Jira, because you're usually searching around a particular tool.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you. Yes, I would agree. That's probably, that is a great one. So what Lynn is referring to is this component field. And as you can see, there's a whole bunch of components, including things like if you knew that the bug that you were looking for is in assignments, you can narrow it down and say, I just want to look at the things that are in the assignments. If you knew it was in the calendar, there's a calendar and schedule, there's gradebook, you could click on gradebook. So yeah, I agree. That probably is the number one issue, or number one field that you would probably want to use. Does anyone else have any other fields that they think are very, very common for using and searching? Okay, I'll just go on, but feel free to interrupt me. That was really helpful. So you could put in that that it's something in 2.8 that you're looking for specifically, or something in 2.9. So that's one that sometimes I use. Then over here, there's the switch to advanced. I'll just show you what Jira has done. So what's really cool is that as you're building with this basic functionality, Jira is building the query for you. And then you could go over here and modify it yourself. Now, this depends on your level of comfort with custom searching, right? If you're familiar at all with searching in databases, like with SQL, that type of thing, then you might feel comfortable with this kind of searching. Another one that I use, another field that I use that I find very helpful is updated field, which is when is the last time a ticket is updated. So this is kind of an interesting little trick I'll share. Let's say I want to see anything that's been updated in the last 6 months or so. I can put in minus 180 days, and it will filter down to anything that's been in the project Sakai that somehow affected something in version 2.8, and it's with a component assignment. And text has something to do with sort order. So I'm going to pause for just a second and just see if there's some questions as I edit this. So notice I'm just going to edit this query directly myself. Of course, then you're more likely to make typos. Are there any questions? No? Okay. Aaron, are you picking up any questions? Because I'm not looking in the chat window. Or do you want to add anything to this?
There's no questions yet, just some comments essentially. I think somebody's saying they didn't see components as a choice, and they're helping each other, which is good. It's internal class participation. We like that. Oh, there is a question. Can you search by words in the text of the summary?
Yes. Yeah, so if you want to make it not just a broad text, but just in the words of the summary, you can simply use the summary command. And that'll limit the search to not just searching all the text fields in the tickets, but just those particular ones. The other thing that I think might be a useful thing, and as I'm thinking about it here, is let's say you opened an issue, which we're going to show you how to open an issue in just a few minutes, a Jira ticket. You can search based on ones that you've opened. So you could do something as simple as reported by reporter. And notice how as I'm typing something in, Jira has a type ahead, so it knows what the valid fields are for me to enter, and it puts them in for me. And as I type in my name, it also recognizes my name and lets me select from that. So Jira is very smart about those sort of things. So if I just, and for most people, I'm guessing on this call, you probably, over time, you can see I've reported 75 issues, but if you've only reported like 1 or 2 issues or 12 issues, you probably even find it quicker. And again, we can always narrow down our search by just adding more criteria. So ignore all the SAK stuff there, except for the CLA. So I've gotten it down. And then I can use things like status if I know that that's, if I want to see all the ones that are still open. And then that narrows it to 28. And you can also, once you found your Jira issues, you can click on it to get more detail. And Jira has keeps track of the list, so you can kind of scroll through and look at each one. That's a pretty useful feature as well. So let's see. I can't think of anything else except, like I said, Jira is very rich. Now notice that now I cannot switch to basic, and that's because I've done some custom query in here, and Jira is not able to figure out how to translate it back to that basic mode where I can build it using pop-down lists for the most part. So I could always start over with search from issues here. If you'll notice, there's another thing here, which is save as, and this is another quick thing, and then I'll move on from searching. What that does, how come it's not showing me? Oh, there we go. Took a second. What that does is let's say you've created this really complicated, complex query. You can then click Save As and save it as your own filter so that you can come back to it at a later time and use it for yourself. By default, Jira makes these filters private, and I think except for administrators or people who have been granted the privilege, I don't think there's a way to share it more publicly. So filters that administrators of the system create or people granted that special privilege, they can share it and make it public. And as you can see, I have a whole bunch of filters along here, many of which are public and are filters on things like, we haven't named the new release yet, but let's say right now we're calling it 2.10. So I've got a filter for the things that need testing for QA. So I can simply click on that, and that is a public filter. And there's other filters as well that you can use. And and that's an easy way to sort of pre-can the search for yourself. So I'm going to move on to the next part, which is, again, feel free to jump in with questions or comments like you've been doing, is to track issues. So tracking issues in Jira, this is really, I find it a very elegant and easy thing to do. There's several ways of tracking. One is if you open a ticket, if you're the reporter of a ticket, automatically you will be tracking the issue, and Jira will send you updates as other people commented on the ticket, as the status of the ticket is changed, as it goes through the Jira workflow. So you'll get that automatically. If you comment on a ticket, which is highly recommended. So let's say you found a ticket, going back to our use case, and you've opened a bug, or you found a bug, and you actually found the particular ticket that has that bug. You could add in your information here, but you would typically read through the ticket, see what is already there. This one's been resolved and fixed, so most likely there wouldn't be much for you to comment on. But if it was open issue, if the status was open, perhaps you can chime in of what your experience is that might help the folks that have already commented. So if you're seeing something in your experience that's different or augments what's already in there, you click on comment, make your comment, and automatically all those people are notified that you've made a comment. And from that point on the ticket, you will be watching the ticket, and people will, and you'll see changes to the status and changes to the ticket. Then there's this little watch icon over here, and if you click on watch, that does the same thing. Now, without commenting on the ticket, without having created the ticket, you will be notified of any changes to this ticket. So watching a ticket is a very powerful thing. And if you decide you don't want to watch a ticket anymore, you simply click it again, and you're no longer watching the ticket. So those are ways of tracking the ticket. So let's say you've done your search, and now you're ready to open a ticket. So this I think can be a little bit daunting. Is okay. Let's say you've done your search, you haven't found a ticket, so now you've posted to the dev list or your production list. You've gotten some feedback. It does seem like it's a new issue. Somebody else can even verify that they've been able to reproduce the problem as well. Now it's time to create a ticket. In the upper right-hand corner, there's a create issue. And the first thing is that you want to make sure that you're creating the issue in the right project. And again, for the 90% or more of the cases, you will pick Sakai CLE. And if you found a bug, then naturally that's what you would be picking, is that you're reporting a bug. The summary field is really critical. It's good to put this in something that's as English as possible, understandable as possible for the community, because it's often the first thing that people see. I'm going to create a dummy ticket. So I'm going to make sure that the summary says that. And then we'll say stack trace when adding a message. I'm just making that up. I'm not aware of any stack trace problems in creating messages at the moment. And then here's that component issue that we talked about. So if I'm talking about the messages area, I'd probably look down here and go, there's message. And then the effects version, well, if you're testing on 2.9, it's very helpful to the community to know which issue you found this problem in. Did you find it in 2.9.3? Did you find it in 2.9 or an earlier issue? And that's also helpful as yourself or others in the community try and replicate your issue, because if you tested it in 2.9, somebody might test it in 2.9.3 or 2.9x, which is sort of the ongoing latest version of 2.9, and find that it's already been fixed. Or they might be able to reproduce it and realize it's not just a 2.9.2 problem, it's really in 2.9 period, no matter what version you're using. Fixed version you should leave blank for the most part. This is used by the team that's looking at the issue, and they'll kind of determine what makes sense for the fixed version. Assignee is automatic, you can leave that. Reporter is yourself. Environment, it's really helpful if you can put in where you tested it. So if you put it on Firefox, version 24, Mac OS X, as much information about your environment as possible can be really, really helpful. Also, which version of Sakai that you're using. Is it a local version? That's really important too, because as you probably most of you know, you can modify Sakai to your local needs. So one of the distinctions is this a problem in core Sakai, or is this a problem that's local to your institution? As much as possible, if you can figure that out ahead of time before reporting, that's a huge time saver for everybody. If you're testing on trunk, which I'll describe in just a second, then you should also include the revision number, which I'll show. That's a really helpful piece of information for the community to have. The description is where you put a description of the bug. As much detail as you can do, and steps to reproduce is just incredibly helpful, because this allows us, if we're not exactly understanding, if the community is not exactly understanding, what it is that you're saying is wrong, if you give a step-by-step explanation of how to reproduce the bug, then that's going to help your ticket, your issue, get attention a lot faster and help the community to track down the problem a lot quicker. If you have screenshots, you can also add them. Those are also very, very helpful. So we encourage using screenshots and attaching them to the ticket. Most of the rest of this stuff you primarily can ignore. I will mention that if you think you have run into a security issue, that you should write to the security team directly at security. And so I'll show that's at, what's the address for that, Aaron? It's Sakai-security at collab.sakaiproject.org, right?
That sounds correct. Let me just double check, but I think you're right. In fact, I will paste it into the chat there.
Thanks. And the reason that's important to send it directly to the security group, do not send those issues to the dev list or the prod list, because if it turns out that what you found really is a security issue, then we want to have the security team some time to triage it, to figure out how they're going to approach the issue, how they're going to communicate the issue to the community. If you just put it out onto the public lists and the security team hasn't had time to review it and figure out its approach, then it opens up Sakai to additional risk of being exploited, because those lists are all public and searchable on Google. So the other thing I'll mention is, if you're not sure about how you're creating this ticket, and by the way, you can ignore these fields for now, it's okay, because everything in Sakai and Jira is editable. And so somebody looking at your ticket like myself or somebody else in the community or on the CLE team, they'll know if you've put it in the wrong project, if you've maybe set the priority to a much higher level than probably we would collectively assess it as. If there's missing information, we'll put a comment on here, which you'll get in your email, so that you can provide more information. So don't worry too much about getting it wrong. Just do the best you can to fill out what makes sense to you. If you get the component not exactly right, the community's there to kind of support you and help get that in the right form to be tracked. But opening up these issues is really, really a vital communications piece for for our community. So I know I went over a lot of things kind of quickly, but I also wanted to give time in case there's questions or other areas people think that it might be worth covering.
Well, I want to toss a couple things in just to emphasize essentially about the ticket. In essence, I mean, we did talk about steps to reproduce, but images, screenshots, for example, are way more helpful than you might imagine. And URLs, like for example, if there's a URL at the top of your browser and you think, well, that kind of tells something about what I was doing, you're probably right, right? I mean, the URL is usually meaningful, not always, but it certainly can be. If there are any error messages that appeared anywhere, the whole error message is really helpful. If you have any way to talk to someone technical and get something out of the logs, like for example, okay, we're seeing this failure happening. And so you go to your administrator and say, hey, I saw this failure happen at X amount at X time. And then they look in the logs and they say, oh, look, there's a stack trace. That stack trace is worth its weight in gold, right? Because a lot of times the stack trace tells exactly what failed at exactly what point. Not always, but often. So just from a development perspective, having screenshots, having stack traces, having error messages, it's I would argue that it is basically impossible for you to put too much information in a Jira, right? It is, on the other hand, quite possible to not put enough information to be able to figure out what's going on. So steps to reproduce, like Neal said, those are really important. Any extra information about your environment, sometimes it's helpful to mention which browser you're using. I'm trying to think if there's anything I'm leaving out. And we do have all this stuff written down in Confluence in the Jira guidelines, so it's not like you have to remember everything I said, but I just want to emphasize that if you feel like you're putting too much detail into a Jira, you're like, oh, they don't want to read all this. It's easy to ignore stuff if we have to when developers are trying to work on something, but it's hard to figure something out when it's not there, right? So just err on the side of too much detail.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I thought I'd just bring up a stack trace so you can see what it looks like. So you should never get one of these when you're using Sakai. If you do, this we would consider a very, very high priority bug. We don't want users to be seeing this really ugly mess. It's not necessarily ugly to programmers because it helps them to kind of look through and figure out where a problem might exist. But we certainly don't want students, faculty, researchers, and so forth to have to experience something like a stack trace. We also mentioned, I'm glad you did build on that because then it reminds me that you can always come back to your issue. Of course, you can add additional comments as you get additional information. So there's a comment button down at the bottom. If you at a later time want to add in the screenshots, there's a more actions button. And under here, let's see, attach files. There's also this interesting one, attach screenshot. I think I tried using that before, and it's actually like it tries to take the screenshot for you or something. I'm not sure, but I usually use attach files with my screenshots and images that I've taken on my system. So that's a good one to know about. That's under
here. Definitely, I never use the attached screenshot either. I don't think it's actually helpful. I always just take a screenshot using whatever tools I've got handy. In OS X, there's just a key combination you hit, and then you grab a piece of the screen that you want. And I think Windows, even the newest Windows, probably has something like that too. But if it doesn't, there's little programs that'll do that too. But I always do it myself and then just attach the screenshot as a file.
So I mentioned one other thing, which is Trunk, which is a special version of Sakai, which you can get to easily. There are special versions of Sakai that are maintained on what are called the nightly servers. Let me see if I can get rid of that. And the nightly servers are listed here, nightly2.sakaiproject.org. These are really, really helpful for testing, including if you report an issue. If you have time, it's hugely helpful if you can test on other environments, including 2.9x is the very latest version of 2.9. So even after, let's say, 2.9.3 is released, the community still may make fixes to 2.9 and is making fixes to 2.9. So that's a helpful one sometimes to test to see if it's already maybe been fixed in the 2.9 release. Trunk is the very, very latest code base of everything. So this is where people put in new features, new fixes all the time. And if you test on Trunk, that can help you to see if the issue's been fixed in the very latest version of the system, or you might find bugs specifically in this version, which we also want to know about. And at the bottom of the screen here, it has something called Sakai revision number. So if you do test on Shrunk, that revision number is hugely helpful because it tells the status of what the code looked like at the time when you tested. So those are some additional things that can be helpful for the community. So the more places that you can test, or that you can get others to help you test, that's also very, very helpful. And including those comments on a ticket of where things have been tested. Has it been tested just on your local instance or on one of the nightly servers or on a QA server is quite helpful. I also mentioned the documentation. So going back, we've mentioned the Sakai Jira guidelines. So I'll just show that again. This is the stuff that's specific to how the Sakai community uses Jira. There's also Jira Documentation. The company who is generously supporting us in using this software is Atlassian, who provides our support for us using Confluence, the wiki, as well as Jira. And we are on Jira 5.2, and so you can see that at the bottom here. And this is documentation for very, very extensive documentation. So if you want to get more involved, more in depth in terms of how to do the ad hoc kind of searching, or how you can do more complicated or interesting text searches, in general, I found I'm not sure how much that's needed, but it's there, and it supports things like wildcard searches, and fuzzy searching and proximity searching and all kinds of things. So that's another option for you, is to look at that documentation to help figure out how you want to do your searching. So are there any questions at this point? We're kind of at the last 10 minutes or so of the webinar, and wanted to make some time in case, again, you have some questions or areas you want to look at or discuss or comment on. How about using Jira for new incubation projects? So Aaron, maybe you want to take this one. I would think that, yeah, do you have a sense of how Sakai, Jira, and the incubation process relate?
Sure. Are we talking about Apereo incubation, or are we talking about like Sakai tools as far as projects are concerned? So I realize I have to ask that question and wait for the answer to be typed.
Yeah. So it looks like Janice is saying.
Okay. So, so a project that's using LTI integration with Sakai, I mean, in essence, if it's LTI integration with Sakai, then it sounds like it's, could technically integrate with anything. So something, it sounds like it's more like an Apereo type project. I don't know if I can speak too authoritatively on the Apereo process, but my understanding is that Apereo has a separate Jira instance, and you could use their Confluence, and I think all of the Apereo projects are now being hosted over in GitHub just because it's free, for example. So you'd probably be putting the code in GitHub, but certainly I think managing a project in Jira makes a lot of sense. I mean, I'll tell you from sort of a Unicon perspective that we use Jira for every project that we do, even if the project is as small as adding an enhancement to Sakai. If it's something that is private, not part of the community, which does happen, then we'll put that in an internal Jira project. We'll make essentially a project just for that enhancement. If it's done out in the community, then, obviously we just do it in the community Jira and use the SAC project or whatever is appropriate. But yeah, I think using Jira to manage projects makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's definitely how I would do it. So yeah, using Jira for incubation projects absolutely makes a lot of sense. No question to me. I'm not sure if that totally answered your question, but the other question, which is easy to answer, is do we recommend adding log stack traces also, or how do we recommend adding logs? Oh no, it's just, do we recommend adding log stack traces in the Jira? Yes, we do. Definitely. If you want, you can put them in the comment instead of putting it in the description if you don't want the description to sort of be a giant mess. That's what a lot of people do. In fact, they'll make a description which is sort of steps to reproduce and commentary about the issue, and then they'll attach the stack trace underneath as a comment rather than putting it in, making the description huge. The other thing you could do, which I see people do every once in a while, is they'll attach the stack trace as an actual file, so like a text file with just the stack trace in it, or maybe with a snippet of the logs which has the stack trace in it. One thing I'll recommend that you probably don't want to do is attaching, say, your entire log file for the day. People do that sometimes, and honestly, it just makes it really difficult for the developers to find the appropriate error messages in something like 10 megabytes worth of text.
Will quick search go through the comments? Yes, I believe that the quick search, I'm pretty sure that that text area goes through the comments. We can check. We only got a couple minutes here. I can double check on the Jira documentation, but I'm pretty sure that when you do a search like this, let's take a look at a comment in here and just see if it picks it up. So I'm going to do trigger group because that seems pretty unique. Trigger group. So you notice it's not in the summary of this one. Let's see, where is it? Trigger group.
Could very well be in the description. I mean, I'm pretty confident that it searches the description and the summary. I'm not as confident that it actually searches the oh wait, did I say, yeah, summary and description. I'm not as confident that it searches the comments. It might.
I'll take a look.
I'm just not sure.
Yeah, I'll take a look. That's a good question. I'll be happy to send something out. As we now, assuming the recording works okay, I'll double check the Jira documentation and see what it says.
Yeah, we can. I mean, we can just send a follow up to everybody who, well, at least send a follow up to the same email that had the invite for the meeting. So.
Right. Any other questions about that? I guess I would mention that when you're doing QA, then if you get into doing QA testing, all of the things we've talked about apply, and then there's additional information on top of that in terms of QA, because then we are sensitive about where we're doing, specifically where we're doing our testing and how we're doing our reporting is a little bit more rigorous and defined. Oh, you're welcome.
And I imagine some folks are maybe wondering, well, we're waiting to see if anybody has any other questions. They might be wondering, how do I get people to pay attention to my JIRAs? Like, say, for example, you put some JIRAs in and nobody takes any action on it for, say, weeks or possibly even longer. I will tell you that occasionally it can be questionable who should actually take action on a JIRA, right? So there are certain areas of the code that are kind of being looked after by someone or possibly a group of people. And so if you put a JIRA in and nobody reacts to it, nobody comments on it, there could be a number of reasons for that. But if you feel like it's really critical, that's the kind of thing that, give it a few days. You don't need to highlight it instantly when you put that JIRA in. But if you feel like it's important, feel free to bring it up on list, draw some attention to it. That's, in my opinion, that's the best way to get someone to look at a JIRA, if you feel like it's a critical issue, right? I mean, and you'll see that happening. I mean, there are examples of it right now today where people are posting information about certain issues they feel are critical and getting a discussion going, and that helps getting things helps get things addressed, is what I was trying to say.
Aaron, it looks like a question's come up. A really good question from Alex. Do you see that one? If we detect a bug in trunk, but also in 29X, and we think that could be important to merge, should they merge it? Should they mark it and the merge flag as soon as they create the JIRA, or wait? It's a little more detailed question than probably most people on the call are familiar with, but it's a good one.
If you feel like it does apply to 2.9, feel free to mark it as merge. The reality is that when these tickets are worked on and reviewed by the release team, it's not like it's not an autopilot thing. In other words, nobody's just going to go through and be like, oh, tickets marked for merge, I just better go ahead and do that. Every ticket that's worked on is reviewed to say, is this appropriate for 2.9? If so, we're going to go ahead and pass it through to the final process and actually do the merge. So if you mark something as merge, and people do this a lot, right? They'll create a ticket and they'll say, oh, I want this in 2.9, so I'm going to go ahead and mark it as merge. And we'll look at it and say, that's a new feature. That won't go back into 2.9, right? So it's not like it's going to slip by if you do mark it. It does make someone pay a little bit more attention. You could also have the same effect by just putting a comment to say, we really feel like this would be valuable to get it merged back into 2.9. So putting a comment on there or putting the merge flag are roughly equivalent.
So I'm just going to digress, and as we're at the top of the hour now, I need to wrap up. There's one thing that probably I think everybody on this call, because I recognize a lot of names, already knows, but since this is being recorded, it's probably also worth reminding, especially people who are watching this who don't know the context, that Sakai is a volunteer community of developers and testers from all kinds of different institutions and commercial affiliates. So it's not like we have a development staff or a QA staff or a program staff that as these tickets come in, that there's this automatic process that certain people take it and triage it and work on it and do it. Nobody has that particular commitment. We're just very lucky that we have a very active community and people who really care about the product and have a vested interest in it, that we do get a lot of that kind of activity of people who are willing to respond to questions on the list, people who are willing to review the tickets, like on our CLE release team calls and that sort of thing. But it's kind of an important context that we didn't mention because so many people on this call, maybe everybody here understands that, but somebody watching the recording may not have that context. And it's an important one to remember. And we owe a big thanks to those folks in the community like Aaron. That's true. We are the Sakai community. Yeah. So I think it's probably about time to wrap up. Any other final comments, Aaron?
Put me on the spot, eh?
Yeah.
Nothing sort of is jumping to mind. I mean, I do want to emphasize that if you're feeling desperate, right? Essentially, you're having a major issue and you really want to get it in front of people. Creating Jira is definitely part and parcel of that. I know a lot of people will go on list and just ask a question. And then, 2 or 3 weeks later, they'll say, oh, by the way, this is taking our servers offline. Well, if you're having a real dire issue like that, it helps to document it. So create a ticket, flag it up on list, ask for help. There are certainly people who are out in the community who can help, and don't feel like you need to follow some process. And if you go around the process too much, then eventually Neal will have to come and sort of put the smack down. But in general, I think people are just happy to help. So take advantage of the community when you can. And give back also. Yeah, in other words, if you see questions on list or you see Jiras that you recognize as an issue you have addressed, jump in, toss a comment out. It doesn't mean that you're obligated to help anyone, but sometimes it can really save somebody a lot of trouble, and maybe they'll buy you a beer at the next conference.
That was a good impromptu wrapped up. Thanks. So thank you everyone for attending. Hopefully I'm going to go ahead and turn off the recording now, and hopefully if that worked, I assume it did, then we'll be able to publish that. In addition, we have Janice apparently took really detailed notes, so that's awesome. We can reference that as well. And if there's any additional questions, feel free to